Why are people fickle? Why are we double-minded? We're afraid of hard things, trust, a greater love, fear, lack of value, loss of hope. I submit to you that if we continue to normalize fickleness and we don't pursue the stable ground of commitment, we in the next generation will lack an appreciation for the gospel, which will ultimately lead to generational apostasy. And we'll be left to deal with the unstable ground of a capricious culture that we have failed to combat. Fickleness is something that no one likes to be the victim of. Yet most of us, if not all of us, have victimized somebody with our fickleness at one point or another. Now, I know that most of you listening would never want to be characterized as a fickle person. Still, in today's cultural moment, fickleness seems to be normalized even amongst Christians. Commitments we've made and agreements we've entered into seem to be thrown to the wayside easily and quickly. So much so that people are shying away from making commitments at all nowadays. But I submit to you that if we continue to normalize fickleness and don't pursue the stable ground of commitment, both we and the generation to come will lack an appreciation for the gospel, which will ultimately lead to generational apostasy. And then we'll be here to endure the self-inflicted wounds of a capricious culture. James chapter 1, verse 8 says this: "The double-minded are unstable in all their ways." And so the question we need to answer is, why? Why are we double-minded? Why are so many of us ready to renege on our previously agreed upon commitments? Why are people fickle? Let's dive in. So before we can tackle the question of why are people fickle, I think it's important that we define some terms first. First, we'll define fickle. Fickle is being marked by a lack of steadfastness, consistency, and stability, given to erratic changeableness. Now let's define commitment. Commitment is to follow through on an obligation, binding agreement, or trust. Now, to be sure, not every change that we'll ever make can be categorized as being fickle. I mean, there are certainly times where it's good and it's godly to pull out of a situation, to cancel a previously agreed upon engagement. But if we're honest with ourselves, most of the time when we jump out of an engagement or jump out of an agreement, we're doing so out of selfish motives, and we're doing so out of a mindset of self-preservation rather than fulfilling what it is that we've agreed upon. We're afraid of hard things. What we tend to do is elevate our pain in such a way that it gives us an out so that we don't have to experience the hardship of reconciliation and the hardship of making things work. And it's in those areas in particular that we can categorize somebody or somebody's actions as being fickle. And so let's start with this. What are some overarching categories of fickleness that lead you and me in that direction from time to time? Well, the first category, the first big bucket that I like to call them, is trust. Trust is a complex word. Trust is hard to define. It's hard to sum up because it's nuanced. There's so many different variations on trust and ethical considerations when it comes to that concept. But if we had to define trust, I would define it this way. Trust is a confident reliance on that which is perceived to be firm, safe, and secure. That involves some non-negligible vulnerability to being betrayed on the truster's side. Take a minute and chew on that definition. Now, if Genesis chapter 3 taught us anything, it's that things are not always what they're perceived to be, and that trust comes with consequences. You know, we stand on this side of the fall and we see the consequences of trust. And what we do is we project those consequences into the future, which then cause us to behave with fickle behavior because we saw what it did to them and we don't want that to happen to us. And then we read scriptures like Psalm 41 verse 9, and that doesn't do anything for helping us trust one another, does it? But is it possible to function well as a society without this crucial reality we call trust? And at what levels are we ethically obligated to trust? And how do we tend to respond when that trust is broken? A lack of trust is one major reason people tend to lack commitment. The second big bucket is this: the presence of a greater love. The presence of a greater love is one major reason people tend to lack commitment and act in a fickle manner. Now, canceling your evening plans with the ladies because you'd rather go to bed and snuggle up in your covers isn't that big a deal in the grand scheme of things, right? I mean, maybe you overcommitted, you were tired that night, what have you, and you canceled on them. Cool. But what tends to happen is that we develop patterns of reneging and patterns of cancellation. And those are the times that we need to be concerned about the most. This theme of a greater love has something I call idolatrous undertones to it. For it makes you a slave to whatever you love most at any given moment. Whatever is your greatest love at any particular moment is the thing that you're going to do. And that's a very dangerous proposition. You have plans for the future, but they all lack teeth because you love pleasure over progress at certain times. The same is true when it comes to our spiritual disciplines. Your flesh doesn't want to pray. Your flesh doesn't want to read the scriptures and spend time on God. It'd rather do ABC. But is that the best thing for you at any particular moment? You see, sometimes the things that we want is a good thing. And those are good things to chase. The things that have our greatest affection or love at the moment is something that is good for you and will grow you and help you grow closer to Jesus and others. But more often than not, we have to train ourselves to fight those momentary loves in order to achieve what I call the best thing. You see that principle in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 24 through 27. The presence of a greater love is one of the major reasons people tend to lack commitment and act in a fickle manner.